Happy Thursday. Kayla Lee here, coming to you live, and I am joined by a very special guest. Today it is Michelle Baty again. You guys have probably been seeing a lot of things from us on social media lately. Oh, also we're joined by Dobby, who wants to play right now. But it's not playtime, Bobby. Mummy's got to work. So welcome to this live. Michelle's going to be joining us in a moment, and we are going to be speaking about the 4 pillars included in the neuroscience of coaching system. And so here she is. If you have been seeing our posts that have been going out the last couple of days, we have put out a quiz or an assessment. There she is. Can you see me, or am I a blank screen again?
See you this time for the first time ever. Amazing.
That's crazy. What happened?
Tech.
So I was just telling everyone, we've been putting out a special quiz and a special assessment for coaches who can self-identify which of the 4 pillars, if there's one, if there's a couple, that they might be missing in their current coaching system,
Yep.
which could be causing their clients to drop off.
Yep.
So today on the live, what we're going to be talking about is each of these 4 pillars, being able to see what they're made up of, because there's 8 steps within each of those 4 pillars, and really determining if there's one, if there's a couple that might be missing from your current coaching system. And then if you would like some help with filling in those gaps, we are starting the neuroscience of coaching in less than 2 weeks. We've got like a week and a bit. But next week is the last week to book in for an enrollment call. So we're taking everyone through an enrollment call before we start the container, just so everyone knows what's included, what's in there, and we can really identify whether this is something that is going to help you in your business and how we can do that. Michelle, welcome. Do we need an introduction again? I feel like everyone should know you by now.
Take it away. Introduce. Let's see what you have to say, Kayla. Who is Michelle?
Yeah. Well, this is what I've been saying to everyone who I've been getting on calls with is I've been working with Michelle for 5 years now, which that time has just flown by. We started working together personally before it was a professional relationship. And honestly, the work and Michelle herself has literally changed my life. And she's going to be super shy about it and be like, it's the work, it's the work. But honestly, like, it's completely shifted. Like, I had no idea what the nervous system was before I met you. I had no idea what I was even signing up for 5 years ago. But I think it's one of the biggest things that, we're not taught. We're not taught about our nervous systems growing up. I was literally speaking to someone today, like, this should be a prerequisite to being a human being, is understanding how each of us operate. And it can literally just change so much. Personal relationships, coaching relationships, relationship with self. Like, it is absolutely huge and incredible, and I'm so obsessed with this work, as I know you are too. She's been doing it for 19 years. She's worked with thousands of clients. She's been working with some of the top tier coaching companies in the fitness industry with exactly what we are bringing to Soul Trader coaches now. So we're so super lucky. I'm so grateful, and yeah, I just love working with you.
That's nice. Thanks for a hell of an introduction. It's a hell of an introduction. I know we're going to aim to keep to time today, which we tried the last 2 times, and it's really hard to rein me in, but I'm going to do my very, very best. So I know there's a couple of things that we want to explore, Kayla, and I really trust your sense and guidance. Keep me in check. Kick us off, because there's some main things we're going to explore. So what you got for us?
Yeah, I really think this concept of what's exactly included inside the neuroscience of coaching, what is the system that we take coaches through to implement into their already coaching business, so that it's going to increase client retention, increase client compliance and results, and then keep them retained for the long term, so that you can feel successful in your business, but also so that your clients are doing such a great job and being able to get the results that they're paying you for. So these four main pillars are exactly the process that we're taking everyone through in the neuroscience of coaching. Obviously, we're not going to be able to hit all the details in a 12-week course in a 40-minute live, but the first pillar that we take everyone through and that we want to identify when we have clients coming on is the pillar of client location. So why is this pillar so important? How do we figure out our client's start point? And how do we do that in a systemized way that's not just guessing?
Yeah, great question. And in my experience, not just in the fitness industry, but also just working with human beings generally across the board, and then we bring in some academics on it, is neurally, everybody's in a different place when they begin and when they engage. And this is really important for us to know, because anytime we're being prescribed habits from a coach, or we as a coach are prescribing habits to clients, if we prescribe too much, too soon, or it's for too long, there's this really interesting function that shows up in the nervous system. The amygdala goes off, among other functions, and it tends to shut our nervous system down. So that's how we would define it: too much, too soon, for too long. And what's interesting as a coach, and we've talked about this in previous lives, is fitness is often the thing you live and breathe it, right? Oftentimes we will step into learning to be a coach because we have enjoyed it ourselves. We might also like people. That's an advantage. We might want to pay that forward and be able to share that with people around us. So we take that pathway in terms of our career. But even when I was a coach, as a PT, while I was studying this in my early 20s, in that there were elements that I really took for granted in terms of how much easier it was when I was working at a gym to be able to train on my break. I was thinking about it all the time. I was immersed in it the entire time. Like, much of my world was involved being a coach and fitness and nutrition, which just by default means that we have more neural engagement and more focus point and more energy that's being directed to this thing that for us is something to pay attention to and to prioritize. But for clients, they don't necessarily have that skill set yet. They work their own day job where they're focusing on something else. And as a result, their threshold and their capacity for prescription of new habits is going to be significantly lower than we might notice in ourselves, where it's our career and it's something we're interested in, it's something we do personally as well. So often there can be this conundrum between the two. Coaches take for granted the amount of skill and capacity they have for this area. They've been practicing it so long, they love it, their nervous system is so engaged, and therefore they can learn at a higher rate most often. So they take that piece for granted, and also the work that they've put in, but that can be a little tricky when they're working with clients that are in different start locations. And we'll talk more about what this means in a sec, but it can be kind of tricky because what might seem like not an overloaded amount of habit prescription for a client or for us is actually way too much for a client that might be new, or particularly a client that's going through a season of stress. So this idea of being able to assess, track, make sense of client location, what we speak to here is, what is the psychological readiness of your client and how do you measure that? And then also, what is the capacity that their nervous system has at any given time? It may be in certain seasons they've got a ton of capacity. And we notice this, and I'll check with you in a sec, Kayla, with clients that are like absolutely crushing it, or they're really, really excited and they dive straight in and they're doing super well. But then something happens, right? Life happens. And it may be that there's competing variables and competing priorities, and suddenly their capacity is significantly lower. So what was working before isn't working as well now. So we're not just looking at client location in terms of assessing psychological readiness and nervous system readiness from the start. We're also building skills and tools to be able to assess at any given point where they are, and ensuring that we as coaches can adapt and shift based on the season that the client is in. We have to be able to adapt, and our prescriptions need to be malleable. But one of the biggest pieces that's missing is coaches might not necessarily know the signals of when that's showing up. Moreover, if they do know, which is still quite rare, if you don't know how to track the nervous system, but even if you do, how do you respond to that? How do you shift and change your prescription? How do you pull back, just like a deload in programming? And I'd love to hear your take on this piece in terms of biomechanics, Kayla. How do you pull back and deload from a psychological perspective? What does that even sound like? in coaching, even if we are able to pick it up. So it can be a really tricky one. If we don't get it right, nothing else works after that. So number one precursor, almost always missing. If there is one pillar that is the most important, it's going to be the first one, and that's the one that does not show up anywhere I've seen in any company I've worked with. And it's simply because we haven't been taught to track the nervous system. And if we notice cues, we don't know how to interpret them. If we do know how to interpret them, we don't necessarily have the skills to respond to them. So I'd love to hear from you, Kayla, your experience of clients, perhaps different start locations and how you've noticed, and even in the work that you've learned how you might adapt, and some of the things that we teach, but then also when you see seasons change over time. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, even just getting on calls and speaking to the coaches for the neuroscience of coaching, our enrollment calls, one of the biggest things that comes up, we know to ask clients about their goals. And that's often the thing that we prioritize most, which is what we're going to get to in a moment. But often the location is missed. And whenever I bring that up, they go, oh my goodness, this makes so much sense. Why wouldn't I do that? And even then, if they are doing that, it's also more so based off intuition. So it's based off, this is what I perceive this person to be. And as we know, when we go through the neuroscience of coaching, we've got the different levels, but we've also got the different levels with the different aspects of training versus nutrition versus mindset and all the different components. So that's the first thing, is like, it does get missed. And what happens when that gets missed, and I've seen this with clients of coaches before, is if a client is perceived as more advanced and the coach doesn't give a more advanced program, that client's going to disengage because they're going to get bored. They're going to be like, I know all this, I've done this before, this isn't challenging me. And so they don't stay engaged and they drop off. The one that's more common is that a beginner client gets given too much. It's too overwhelming. It's too much of an advanced program. It's not stripped right back. It's like, here's your training program, here's your calories, here's your macros. I want you to hit this many steps a day. I want you to drink this much water. I want you to get this much sleep. Like, I want you to do your meditations or whatever mindset stuff, or like nervous system regulation stuff, which is a whole nother topic. All of that stuff. And if they're not currently doing any of it, it's a lot. It's overwhelming. And then they're just going to go into a nervous system freeze or a flight, and we're not going to see it. Or they might just shut down completely and they're not going to be doing the things. So that is why we start with the client location pillar. And we have actually basically like equations to figure out where they are, and certain criteria that each client has to meet to fall into a specific category, not just like, this client feels like a beginner or they seem a bit advanced. And it's not even just like where they're at now, but what's their training history? What have they done? What's their training age? But what have they done recently? And what have they done a long time ago as well? Because they've done it in the past, but they haven't been doing it recently. Likely they're stepping back a bit and they haven't practiced in a while, essentially. So we need to make sure that we're, number one, like you said, understanding where they are at, meeting them where they're at, not trying to jump the gun, bring them up to where we are. We've got to meet them back at where they're at.
And it's so tricky as a coach, when you're working with clients, because people come to you, they've got their own experience. There's so much that you don't know. And also, in effect, there's so much that they don't know about their nervous system as well. And there's a ton of landmines, right, in the disproportionate challenge and polarization between things, right? So you're talking about something like training age. You were mentioning that, right? How long someone has been training, and the biomechanically, what's going to be appropriate in terms of prescription. Then we look at something like psychological readiness, which is a component too. And this is where it gets so tricky, because you might have a client, and I guarantee there are coaches listening to this right now, they come in full throttle and they're like, I'm doing all the stuff, I'm super motivated, they're ticking all the boxes. This may seem like they are more advanced and they are psychologically ready. However, if you don't know how to track the cues of the nervous system, the cues of reflexes that are too much, leaning in, you're not going to pick up that it may be that is a car crash waiting to happen. So what clients say and how excited and engaged they are on the front end, and as it's perceived, it may seem like they're more ready than they are. Even for the first while, it may be that their behaviors are more ready than their nervous system is, but we need a longer time horizon. And if we don't have the language of the nervous system, we aren't able to track the difference between a reflexive excitement dopamine hit and what is a regulated nervous system state that's slow enough, that's consistently engaging, that we want to build upon. It's the equivalent, so from a psychological perspective, it's the equivalent of a client that's super excited and is just like raring to go and says, I'm going to do a 100-kilo squat, when the most they've done is 20 kilos and their biomechanics need work and they've got a recent injury. Excitement isn't necessarily the cue of readiness. There may be some engagement there, but it's not enrollment. And we need to be able to decipher the difference between those two. Any good coach out there would never prescribe a 100-kilo squat to someone who hasn't been able to effectively do that at 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 or 60. But most of the time in mindset culture for coaches, it's like, just do all the stuff that worked for me one time. You're totally ready for it. Find your why. That is a very advanced question to be asking without knowing what impact that's going to have on their client system. So client location as the precursor. What is the client's history, both from a training and nutrition perspective? What's their perception of it and what's their relationship to it? Also tangibly, what have they been practicing? How do we measure what they've been practicing leading up to that? And then we start to look at their psychological readiness and the cues of the nervous system. The unconscious cues are going to let us know way more about readiness and how we need to pace and prescribe versus what might be said. So a client is going to develop communication as we communicate with them, but at the beginning, that is the highest stakes. That's when clients need the highest level of support. They have the lowest level of skill, which means as a coach, if we don't get that piece right, none of the rest works. So at the very least, it's not going to be effective. Your client is wasting their money. Your client is wasting their time. You are not going to do so well in business over time. And worst case scenario, it's going to be harmful. It's not going to be good for them long term, which I know coaches out there in this business, that is not the goal that they're trying to achieve.
Yeah. And as we've said before as well, the re-sign for that client, that happens from the very get-go. So setting up the client from the very beginning is going to be setting them up for the long term, not just for the container that they've entered, but for those 12 months, 18 months, 2 years that they need to go through to have a process where they can go through all different seasons of life and be set up well for that. So setting up for success, not for failure.
100%. There's this really interesting neuroscience concept, and I'll share this before we move to pillar 2. I promised you were going to keep me on track, and we're already off track. Sorry about
I was
that.
going to be like, we're doing well.
I can see your eyes. The saga, keeping Michelle, reining her in. But a little bit of neuroscience is helpful, and I know everyone loves it. And although it's not everything, we do want application. It can be helpful to anchor us to understanding different concepts. So a little bit of neuroscience here, and this is for all nervous systems. This is not specific to beginners. This is if you are a human being, this is the rule and this is the law that exists in terms of your brain and neuromodulators focusing towards something consistently over time. And it's something we call the 80-20 rule, not the 80-20 rule that we've heard in terms of nutrition, but it's a very interesting overlap. And that is when there is something new, a new demand. In this case, you're a coach and you're prescribing a new habit to a client. That client needs to feel and experience 80% success when engaging with that new behavior and no more than 20% failure, which seems pretty wild, right? Because when we think of our practices with new habits and then clients, we go, there's no way if something's new, they're going to absolutely nail it 80% of the time. That's impossible. And we go, well, that's a conundrum of coaching because from a neurological perspective, to keep our dopamine pathways active, which means our attention is diverted and prioritizes this new habit long enough to get better at it, we need to hit 80%. There's no way around this, 80% success. But if it's not possible when something's new, well, how do we solve this problem? So this, one of the reasons I love neuroscience is a sense of success and sense of failure can be external and objectively measured. Also, it can be a felt sense. So this relationship that we have with clients is the buffer in the gap between clients attempting something and failing over and over and over and over and over, failing forward, right? They're trying, they're trying. But how we support them and how we language success with them with every single communication based on their internal drivers and what's important to them and who they are as a human being, that will be the determining factor between maybe they fail 80% of the time at the start, but how you communicate and build a felt sense of success is the difference between that 20% and 80%. We use communication and relationship to be able to boost dopamine pathways to ensure we are hitting that 80%, because we need to introduce habits that are a little bit more challenging so we can develop skills. But if it's more than 20% failure and we don't have the skills to be able to make up that buffer, your client's gone. They're not going to be able to do it. It has not a character flaw. It's not a statement of willpower. It's literally dopamine pathways shut down if it's not a good enough deal, if the effort isn't worth the reward. So that in the world of ChatGPT, which I think is an amazing tool, right? AI is an amazing tool. There has never been a better time to develop human intelligence and human skills, regardless of whether or not you're online coaching or face-to-face. Our ability to reinforce dopamine pathways with clients with precise skill is the difference between client failure and client success, client staying and client leaving, your business failing and your business succeeding.
100%. And a little bit of fun fact, I don't know if it's 80%, but this also happens with, I don't know if it happens with other animals, but I've heard with dogs, when you're playing with them, maybe it's either dogs or children, I don't know, but still nervous systems, right? If they lose more than a certain percent of the time, they'll stop playing with you. So yeah, there has to be that even split of like winning to losing or winning to failing, succeeding to failing.
And it's that felt sense of success. So like when we're trying external things for the first time, it's just, we can hear in the industry like fail forward and the best thing you can do is learn how to fail. And I go, but how do you learn how to do that without precise communication to be able to reframe success? Right, for me, for instance, and for me, for instance, and you hear this all the time, we work so closely together now, Kayla, we have for such a long time. Even if something stings, right, something I'm not so good at, I'm like, nope, practice. This is practice for the next one. It's just putting in an effort, even if it feels cringe, it doesn't matter. It's putting yourself forward, it's putting in the work. That is success. And that's an example of me having spaces in the past of coaches and mentors and people saying, it's not about the outcome, especially when it's new. It's about the practice. It's about showing up. It's about courage. It's about effort. And that's my 80% win. Without those mental frameworks and without having the opportunity to be able to embed that in my system, I wouldn't be able to support myself with that now. Right? So what might be 80% failure in new practices for me now are actually 80% success because of laying down those neural pathways of social communication and success in that way.
Yeah. Amazing. And moving on to pillar 2 then.
Let's move on to pillar 2. I mean, in fairness, pillar 1 is like, that is the most important. If you're going to focus on anything, it's going to be number 1. It's only up from there. It's also the piece that's almost always missing. Yeah, let's go to pillar 2. You're the boss.
Yeah, pillar 2, I think everyone's a little bit more familiar with, but I think there's also a gap missing in terms of how to do this and how to make it so that clients are able to stick with them. So that is our targets, our client targets. And so I guess, how do coaches help clients come and identify what targets they might need that is going to stimulate them to work towards these targets, as opposed to harboring resistance for them? Because I know I've worked with clients, probably even myself, that sometimes there are targets where you have this resistance towards, and you're like, so how do we set those client targets and work with clients to be able to set those targets?
Yeah, and when we say targets, what we mean by that is partially goals, but then also behaviors and consistency of behaviors that we're aiming to meet. So there's long-term goals in terms of the outcome that we want to experience, but then also what are the behaviors that are required and how often and for how long to be able to hit that. So neuroscience of coaching, those are some of the equations that are there, because even that as a concept, we are not taught that Insert 3 and 4, they don't talk about that. They might say, what is it? Set your big scary
Smart
goal.
goals.
Yeah, set your big
Mm.
scary goal. And I go, well, that's not particularly useful. And also, neurally, the brain isn't able, it's like the gap between a really big goal and what we're doing in this moment. On a neurological level, that gap is way too big. It's too big. The brain can't actually connect those two. The buffer between that is the coaching relationship and communication. Once again, where we're going to talk about it in pillar 3, we start to neurally be able to connect these. So it starts with client location, where they at, what's appropriate for where they're at, how do we assess that, and then we move to, well, how do we set goals? And there's 2 kinds of goals. A lot of the time coaches have heard of this, intrinsic, extrinsic goals. We're going to take it a step further and say there are external objective goals, meaning different numbers, how many reps, what kind of weight we might be pushing. It might be a performance goal, but something that if you and your client both looked at it and evaluated it, you would get the same outcome in terms of what it meant. So weight on the scale, for instance, measurement around the waist, it might be how much weight you're pushing. That's an objective measure. And that's one form of goal. And it's really important for the system to have something external to look at and to evaluate. This is one half of the equation. If it's just there, if it's just the one, then we have problems. We'll talk about that in a sec. But something external outside of our internal experience that we go, am I moving closer to this landmark? This is really well studied, even visually, what's happening in our eyes. People who run ultra marathons, we hear this over and over again, and just the neuroscience of it is fascinating to me. That there's a little landmark, and when we focus our eyes on that landmark, our nervous system has this shifted state to be able to drive energy towards it, and we get a little burst. And then once we have another visual landmark, we get that same kick, and we go again. Another visual landmark, we get that kick, and we go again. If we are simply gazing off into the distance, that might be really lovely and relaxing, and I hope we feel that way on holidays and maybe the weekend and evenings. And also just the visual input, so something that's external that we can see and we can name objectively. If we don't have that visual input, we don't get that same kick of adrenaline and energy and directed inertia. So the external is really important. It has to be something that's also meaningful. I want to check, Kayla, if you want to say anything or share anything in terms of external goal, because we're going to talk about internal and then how they connect together.
No, but I found that really cool about the marathon. I'm going to do that on my next 5-kilometer run.
Yeah. Yeah.
This landmark.
And one of the biggest things is the visual piece. So it's actually less about numbers and it's less about what reps or sets, because your brainstem doesn't really know what those things are. It's that there's a visual input that's outside of us that sends a cue and then our system responds to it. So it elicits energy in a particular way. That is, if the goal is achievable. If it's achievable and we're getting that 80% success or felt sense success, then we're going to get that kick. If it's not enough, we go, that's way too far away. Or it's way too big, or it's way too much, and the system diverts away. So there's the external piece, and then even with nervous systems, just looking at a number or looking at, like, how good does it feel to put a big weight plate on a bar, right? Like, that's a visual cue. So I went from this little one to this big one. And I don't know about you, but, back in the day, I don't lift as heavy as I used to, but I was lifting heavier. On deadlifts, 127 was my max, times 5. That's pretty good. I'm not particularly big. And I just remember the feeling, thinking about it now, of having like multiple plates on the bar. I'm like, I'm badass. I can see it. Can anyone else see it? That's that little card. So none of this is a coincidence. And when we're working with a client, if we can understand the mechanisms behind this, we can release all of the stigma that we may have picked up in the industry, because in the industry, at times we might say, well, external goals, aesthetic goals, they don't matter, we shouldn't. But from a nervous system perspective, they are half of the equation. And it doesn't really matter what form of external there is. We just need a form of external as 50% of what's going on neurally. So that's the first thing. It's going to be different for different people. Yeah, we want to help coaches be able to identify what's appropriate based on client location, like we spoke about. Then there's the internal, intrinsic, the classic question, what is it? Find your why. It just like that question drives me crazy. It totally drives me crazy. It didn't used to, because it's really important to feel connected and to feel motivated. And also, I know that coaches are showing this question with good reason and good intent, because having meaning and having purpose is absolutely essential. It is the other half of the equation. It's not the equation, it's the other half. We need internal as well as external, because neurally, our brain and nervous system is always connecting. What are we doing? What is happening? And then how do we experience that thing? And that's how neurons form. So as a coach, if we understand the mechanisms of this and we can appropriately select based on our client location, what's the external thing that's going to give that cue? Brainstorm doesn't know what numbers are, just needs the appropriate external cue. And then also get a sense of what are the internal drivers that are most important for the client, and how do we put language to that? A lot of the time, find your why is such a vague question. Like, even, I think that's probably why I have parts that are irritated with it at times, where I'm like, what does that
Yeah.
even mean? What is,
Yeah, like sometimes I will ask clients, like, what's your long-term goal?
yeah.
And they won't know. Like, it's just too far off in the distance. It's like,
It's
yeah.
too big, it's too vague. We haven't been taught to put language to it. So we may have, over the years, had coaches or mentors that have supported us in putting language to it, and we take for granted that that is a skill that's been developed because coaches have helped us do that. But when we simply drop that question in for clients, it's very common, and drop a little emoji if this has happened to you before, it's very common that clients don't really know how to answer. They don't know how to give that answer. So oftentimes they might have reflexive parts that, like, say what they think you want to hear, or say what they read somewhere, or say what they think is their why, but we're not eliciting the parts of the brain that drive emotion and drive memory and drive inertia to start to connect it to the behaviors that are occurring. We don't just find our why to journal something and to come up with an answer. What we're looking for is depth and purpose that's connected with our identity. Because when we tap into that, again, just like the visual cue externally, internally, we start to get dopamine pathways that are kicking in, but also there's an intensity, norepinephrine, that's produced, and those are the neurochemicals that are required to start to hardwire neurons together so you remember the behavior and the habit. You are more likely to do it again, and you start to be able to get this really cool loop of, I'm practicing something, I see an outcome, and I move towards it. That means something that's really important to me. And there are three things that are hardwired behaviors in. The first is that we need precision. That's number one. So it has to be something really specific that we're noticing, that we're paying attention to, and that we're practicing. So it might be that we're tracking food. It might be with clients that they are looking or working on technique cues and breathing to be able to support an increase of the weight under the bar, or pardon me, the weight on the bar, that they're moving towards a performance goal. So something really precise where they go, just this one thing I'm practicing right now, precision. We activate the prefrontal cortex. We have to be very focused and aware on that. There's some really cool neural things that are happening. So that's number one. We have to know exactly what we're doing, be really present with that. It has to be so manageable, cannot be complex. The next is the presence of emotion. And a lot of the time I might hear in the industry that we got to take emotion out of it. And I go, nearly incorrect. We do need emotion in the room, because that is the thing that starts to hardwire in memory. And also in future, it's the thing that's going to come up that helps you prioritize. So it solidifies actions and behaviors in, because it's meaningful. The system does not hold on to things that are not meaningful. So any kind of emotion around fear or challenge is going to hardwire things in, but also with support and help. If as a coach, you know how to put language around this, if you do a thing and you get an external outcome and you can measure that, and then we tap into what's the meaning of that? How do we experience it? Why is it important in terms of your life? How do you perceive yourself and your experience of the world? That's when we get the emotion showing up and all those lovely neuromodulators that start to fuse and merge these three things together. I do something, it creates an outcome, and I feel a certain way. I do something, it creates an outcome, I feel a certain way. And when we get that loop right in our communication with a client and we connect those neural links over and over and over again, it's always the same thing. That is what solidifies behavior change over time. It's what makes a habit into a lifestyle. If we don't know how to do that, it's totally erratic in the nervous system, not by fault of anyone, we just haven't been taught, but it's all over the place. Neural connections are firing in a million different ways, and nothing solidifies. An example of this, and I'll get your sense of this, Kayla, is clients might be going really well for a while, and they're so motivated at the outcome, but if we're missing that internal piece, when the outcome isn't there anymore, or things get a little bit tricky, bang, dopamine drops off. because we don't have that internal driver to be able to support and hold it. We've missed the meaning part. The other half of it is if there's a lot of emotion and meaning that's really active, that can get so intense sometimes. A lot of times we have to divert outward to just ground ourselves, right? In my system, I'm such a big feeler, right? Even in, the work we're doing in neuroscience and coaching, I've got a lot of parts that hold such meaning in being able to take good care of people and get right. And one of the number one skills and tools, and I appreciate you so much in this, Kayla, because we do this with each other and it's the best, which is let's just pause and go, what have we done? What's working? What's not working? Let's just look at the data. Things are on track. Things are going well. And that is the thing that helps regulate intensity of emotion. So we need both. And then that central buffer between is the coach who is communicating with the client. You have to be able to track, first identify those two things for your client, which is going to be different, but then track which way they're emphasizing and be able to use communication and language. If they're too external, we just gently bring them internal. If they're too internal, we just gently bring them external. And by that, we start to fuse together. They do something, they get a result, they have a feeling and experience. They do it again, they get a result, they have a feeling and experience. What's your sense? Do you want to share anything around when it hasn't gone well, or with clients, or anything you've noticed with coaches?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head with the piece where it's like if there's a plateau and they're not getting those external rewards, because it does happen. Like you hit a plateau on your weight, you hit a plateau in your weight loss, like weight on the bar, weight loss. Like it happens all the time, whether it's like a client who wants to lose weight and they're not seeing changes in their body composition. But we know that there can be a delay in that as well. There's also, on the other hand, like power lifters who they could spend years like trying to hit the next weight, trying to get the next PB, and there has to be that internal driver to keep them going when that's not quite hitting the mark.
Yep.
So yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with that one. I'm sorry if you hear my dogs.
We never apologize for the puppy dogs. They are always welcome. They're so, so welcome. I mean, even learning this through the neuroscience of coaching, there is no way to escape that you're also learning about your own system. And you might pick up, oh, I do this thing that actually regulates and supports my continuity in practice. I notice myself say this thing, or I reach out to people that help me regulate when I'm a little too in the emotions and intuition. It's really helpful when someone says, hey, actually, you've achieved X, Y, and Z. Can we just look at the data? That's awesome. Or if the data is really causing us to feel like heart sinking, we notice that in our clients as well. It's going to be more for beginners. Their systems are more vulnerable to this, or seasons of stress. But even as just a person, a coach doing your own practice, if the data is not so favorable, and we're like, oh, that stings, then we're able to then re-divert and go into purpose-driven inertia, and also those what we would call deeper whys, but actually what it is, your midbrain and your limbic system that are coming online that are supporting and helping drive attention. So one is a generation of energy that moves towards something from internal, and the other is the feedback that then triggers it to come up, and we absolutely need both. So one is not better than the other, a marriage between the two, and then making sure that we're balancing from one to the other. And as a coach, we have skills to be able to lean on one or another, or pull our client back into balance. Also our own systems, really important skill.
Yeah, 100%. So we've gone from client location to creating our targets. So this is kind of the diagnostic part of the system. So we're just figuring out where our client is and where they want to go. The next two pillars that we focus on is more of the prescription. So this is where we start to go into the process that we create for the clients. So pillar 3 is client process. So how do we sequence a client's process for long-term progression as opposed to just thinking of these like short-term things? Because I know, for an example, if you don't have those sequenced for long-term progression, what happens is clients will flip-flop with their goals and their targets, and then you're having to create a whole different system in that.
100%. And immediately when you said that, I went, well, that's why we need location and that's why we need targets. because a process that is appropriate to the start point of a client, where they want to go, and how we reverse engineer that in such a way that matches their psychological readiness and also has adaptability based on the season of life. If you don't have those first two pillars, there is no hope to be able to get that process right. And what's interesting is, again, so well intended, right? There's so much good intent with the industry and with coaches, and I really hold compassion with how tricky it is in saying just trust the process and come back to the process. And I'm always curious where I go, well, who wrote that process? And is that process appropriate to someone's start point and external and internal drivers? And what does it look like in terms of malleability when it comes to training and nutrition, but mostly nervous system responses? We look at these concepts. I'd love to hear from you, Kayla. This is your area of expertise, where in periodization and training, we often will have a deload. Yet no one's really talking about, or perhaps has the skill, because they're not neuropsychologists and we haven't been trained in these things, to look at deloads psychologically. How do we bring them in? How do we know that they're necessary? We know these on a biomechanic level, on a physiological level, but when it comes to neuromodulators in the brain, or even capacity for learning, like how much dopamine is in the system to be able to allow us to divert attention to things, these are all factors that are necessary in terms of pacing and deload, and making sure that the process from a psychological perspective is periodized as well. Such a missing gap in the industry. So talk to me about deloads and biomechanics and neuroscience. I'm doing a lot of talking, so I want to hear you. What you got?
Yeah, so I run a mentorship, and so that mentorship has been periodized for a period of time. So it's 6 months long, and it could be 6 months, it could be 12 months, it could be 12 weeks. But in that, the way that it's set up, I don't just, and I mean, I work with coaches, so they're already a little bit ahead. But what I teach in that is when you're starting with your clients, you set them up for a long runway of progression. I'm not just going to go and start like first mesocycle of low bar squats at your high intensity, low volume. It's going to start from lower intensity, higher volume, and then complexity of task more simple, as opposed to increasing complexity over time. And then, usually in that period of time, they're probably not going to need a deload. But in terms of deloading, we can functionally overreach. So I know that you speak about this with the nervous system as well, is to grow, we need to stretch ourselves. So we need to stretch just a little bit beyond our capabilities, which means that we might not necessarily be recovering from that if we were to continue at that level. So as long as we're regulated, as long as we're in a good place, as long as we're not overexerting ourselves, we can functionally overreach for a short period of time where we stretch beyond the body's capabilities of recovery, but we have that planned deload to be able to come back to allow for that recovery to happen. Because if we don't have that, that just leads to overtraining, and we can have overtraining of our physically, we can have overtraining, but we can also have overtraining / burnout of our nervous system.
For sure. And I love the crossover.
Yeah.
Is it okay?
No, I'm done.
I'm like, oh, I want to talk again. You're so patient. Oh, you're so patient, Kayla. Michelle loves to talk. That's the that's the theory of the day. So in that, there's so many theories in biomechanics that are commonly understood. Maybe not as much as they could be. I know that's why AWPT works so hard to be able to teach and work with coaches. I believe you've worked with over 3,000 coaches in AWPT so far in neuroscience of coaching, and in these models in the background where they came from. It's over 4,500 clients that this has been tested on in support of nervous systems across the globe. So we're looking at a lot of data here, but it's one of the reasons that you work so hard at that, Kayla. And we understand these biomechanics concepts more often these days. It's still the same nervous system. Like what's happening in the brain, the central nervous system, your peripheral nervous system, all of the thoughts, emotions, somatics, and behaviors that are generated from this nervous system are housed under the same roof as your muscles, ligaments, and bones. It's in the same home. And yet still in the industry, because it's so new, this piece is really missing. I know people talk more about holistic health these days, which is great, and the connection between the gut and the brain, and like there's a ton of dialogue around it. But in terms of applied skills, of going, if we're deloading and periodizing for biomechanics and for muscle development and for ligament development as well, if that's absolutely necessary and inarguable, where are the places where we go, what's happening psychologically? Because dopamine runs out. It gets burnt out. There isn't an endless amount of serotonin or oxytocin. There are certain stimuli that need to be put in. And when certain neuromodulators are released, that can give a response, it can direct our attention, but also can be quite expensive in the system. It's costly. Or just like increasing weight, progressive overload, when we're learning and trying something new, that is not what the brainstem wants to do. It's not efficient. It takes a tremendous amount of energy in the nervous system to develop new neural pathways, way more than we would attribute. So first we need capacity and bandwidth for that to happen. Then we need that 80% success rate. Then we need to ensure that it's appropriate to where our level is and appropriate to internal and external goals so we can keep that balanced. But then when we look at process, we go, well, how do we do that over time? Even if we get it right this week, how do we know that we can progress that at the right pace, push when we need to? And when there's capacity, how do we pick up the cues of that in our client? There's absolutely a methodology. When you know a client's nervous system is regulated, you can give a little push. What does that sound like? Not too much, safe enough. Might be a little uncomfortable, but then also picking up the cues when it's beyond threshold. How do you pull back? We know how to do this in biomechanics, hopefully. If the weight's too heavy, we might feel like ego of like, look at the weight I can push, but technically speaking, our movement patterns are totally breaking down. The same thing is happening with learning capacity. We might have a client that's going absolutely full throttle and doing all of the things, but it's way outside capacity. And as a result, we're not getting those neural connections where it sticks. They're way outside what we would call the window of tolerance, which means even if there's a high level of compliance that's there, we often will see when they are in that space that they completely drop off and we don't see a continuity or consistency, right? That's the magic word in the industry. Consistency or discipline is not being activated, right? And we need neural pathways to be able to support that. So there's one thing I really want to speak about here on the slide. There's so much that we cover, of course, in the neuroscience of coaching. One, just understanding the theory of this and how it works can be incredibly powerful. But then as well, how does that look in terms of the process that you take a client through and the layers? We need the methodology to be able to do that. Good news is you don't have to guess. We've already sorted it out years and years and years and years, losing sleep over this stuff, making sure that we got it right, testing, bringing it to the front line, because soul traders need help. Coaches need help. That's why we're here. We've said it before. I'll say it again. Anyone in the course, you're going to hear me say that again. That's the vision and the mission behind it. There's that emotion, internal drivers, by the way. So I want to speak about skills and habits. This is something that is really misunderstood and a big part of client process. So that third pillar. And oftentimes we misunderstand the definition of what a skill is. And also we're prescribing habits that don't necessarily align with the skills that are required for a client based on where they're at. So a skill, if we were to define it, is, I equate it to E equals MC squared. E equals MC squared. Everyone kind of knows what it is, right? Oh yeah, like that Einstein thing. But I have yet to meet somebody in the hundreds of thousands of people I've come into contact with. I've yet to meet someone that knows exactly how to calculate that and what its function is, and how to do it on the spot. And E equals MC squared, when you actually break it down, what is that? 5 characters, E equals MC squared. 5 characters, it's actually 26. There is a formula that represents, it's a body of work. So the common public, if you're not an astrophysicist, we look at that and we're like, oh yeah, I know what that is, but you don't really, because you can't use it. It's a skill, it's a body of work, but it is not the step-by-step process and the exact formula that you go through to be able to get the result. So E equals MC squared is kind of like a skill. Squatting is a skill. You cannot prescribe to a client. Yeah, just be consistent, find your why, track your macros. Right? A lot of the time there's good intent from that, and it comes from a place, often this is my experience anyway. Great examples, Kayla. It comes from a place of a coach having an acquired skill set, but taking it for granted and in a way not even giving themselves credit for the amount of work they've put in to acquire that skill. I've seen this time and time and time again. It happens to the best of us. It happens to me sometimes now, although this is the body of my work, so I try to hold myself to it pretty strongly. People who are very, very skilled at stuff, they'll say, "What did I do this thing?" And then if someone isn't able to follow through, one of two things happens. You might either get frustrated with a client. If you really care for clients, you might be a bit bewildered, like, why isn't it working? And like, have I done something wrong? Or like, what's missing? And often it's because coaches are prescribing skills, not habits. So we say, go do E equals MC squared for a person that doesn't know the 26 characters and doesn't know the formula, and they can't do anything with it. A skill is a byproduct. It's an outcome that we can engage, but it is a neural byproduct of habits that we have practiced. And here's where the formula takes place, is it's very easy to prescribe habits that are completely random and habits that don't align and progress. This is where progressive overload comes in, right? Habits that don't align and progress to the single most important skill that a client needs to learn with where they're at right now, based on the goal and the target that you're aiming for them to meet. So we might jump around and prescribe them one habit this week, one habit that week, habit stack, that's a thing, like cluster habits together. These are all really great tools, but the foundation that's missing is based on my client location. What level are they? What readiness are they? Based on the target and where we're taking them and the internal and external drivers, what are the top 5 skills based on that context that they need to learn? And on those 5 skills, there are clusters of habits that you do in sequence to be able to build that skill. It is an algorithm. It is a formula, and most of the time, I say most of the time because I'm not a black and white person, and there's so much nuance, but I've yet to meet a coach and yet to find a company and a space that has all of these things organized. That's been the biggest part of my work working in the back end of companies, is going for this person, what are the top 5 skills and nothing else? Just these skills, and then how do we cluster habits there, and how do we build them over time to be able to hit that one skill? We get that skill, we're prepared for the next. We get that skill, we're prepared for the next. So there's a really lovely sequence. These are the very tidy scientific parts of my brain that love sequence. Can I check with you, Kayla, your sense of this? That skill habit thing is a big one.
It just makes so much sense. Like, it makes so much sense. Why do we not do this? Why do we guess? Why do we use intuition when literally to get someone from their start point to where they want to be, we reverse engineer that process and then break it up so that we can bridge that gap for them. It makes total sense.
Yeah.
It makes so much sense. And yeah.
I think, you know, so master coaches are doing some version of that for sure. Right, that's well documented, that piece of going, where are we now? Where do we want to go? Let's reverse engineer it. Let's set the steps. Right, so that from an applied point of view, it's showing up in a lot of different industries and also at the master level. Most of the time people are not at that level, but I do want to extend into the space that process, for sure, well documented. What's missing is that it's not just those milestones, but what's happening daily and weekly, and how we replicate that with skills and habits every single communication with a client. If there are parts of you listening that go, oh my God, how do you do that? That's so intense. I go, yeah, that's why it's been 19 years of work. And it's why we've put so much work into this, because you're not a neuropsychologist. You don't have to be a neuropsychologist. You have a job. You're a coach working with people. We have done the work on the back end. This has been the life's work to be able to support and help you with that. So you get to do what you are best at and utilize the system, not to replace the amazing work you're doing, but to absolutely leverage it, to organize and sequence it. So all of the knowledge that you've put in and worked very hard to earn, and that really deep intent that you have to be able to support and help people, it lands better. Clients get more result quicker, but most importantly, consistency over time. It neurally is able to hold, and we start to see better client result, better client engagement, and better client retention over time. So regardless of whether or not your goal as a business person and as a coach is numbers or people, neuroscience of coaching targets both. If you take care of the person, you take care of the numbers in your business. So in that, I would say to coaches out there, we want to focus on both. If we're just focusing on people, it's probable that our business is not going to be so healthy, which means we can't keep helping them. If we just focus on numbers, that's such an external focus. We don't have that internal piece. For us as business people and coaches to be able to balance that out, we need both, just like our clients need both.
100%.
Mm.
So we've gone from identifying client location, setting the targets, talking about the process, breaking down those skills into habits, and having that literally all set out. It's already done for you. You don't have to worry about doing it. Then our fourth pillar is our client pathway. As part of this pillar, what are engagement milestones? Because I think this is something that not a lot of coaches have heard of. We've got our weekly check-ins, and we check in weekly, and we do our objectives and all that stuff. We do feedback and have those loops.
Yes.
So what are engagement milestones, and how do they integrate into a coaching system to keep clients engaged and retained?
Yes, I
Long-term?
love milestones so much, and we've probably heard that term before, and maybe even some coaches out there might have some form of check-in, like not just weekly, but maybe at the end of a challenge, or if they're prepping for a competition, or there might be a milestone to go, well, let's just review what we've done and let's go on. So if you aren't doing that, please reach out to us, because it's probable that you need some support and help. It's one of the most important pieces, milestones. But even if you do have that in place, when we are missing the neural context behind why that's important and what effect that has when a client's moving through that process, guarantee we're not going to be doing it in the way that's most effective or the way that's going to get us the result. So when we speak to milestones, essentially what that is, it could be milestones weekly, like a check-in. There's different kinds, right? Daily, weekly, monthly, 6 weekly, but then also I would suggest in a neuroscience of coaching, we go 3 monthly and 6 monthly. Now, depending on the length of the milestone and the check-in, will determine which kind of neural networks are activated. So it's all neural. The whole thing is the nervous system. It's not just, oh, we got to check in and see what your results are. It is, what level of check-in are we doing? Is it a micro level? Is it a mid-level, like 4 weeks or 6 weeks? Is it a macro level, like 3 months or 6 months? And here, the conversations that we have with our clients are going to be specific to how small the neural link is between what they've done and what the outcome is. So what do I mean by that? A weekly check-in, which is considered a little milestone. It's like every 7 days, we do a little check-in. We go, what did we do? This is what we talked about before, right? What did we do? What was the outcome? How do we feel about it? What did we do? What was the outcome? How do we feel about it? We've got that action. We assess what that is externally and what the byproduct and outcome was, and then our feeling and perception. We create this little neural loop, and we're doing that on a 7-day period. And then when we're looking at, one sec, Kayla, I just thought, oh, no, my battery's good. My screen just went down. I thought I lost you there. And then we're looking at a bigger loop, and that is when it might be 4 weeks or 6 weeks. And there we're assessing, it's exactly the same loop. We're assessing the data that we've seen 4 to 6 weeks, and then helping them zoom out from the weekly, right? These are all neural skills to be able to zoom out, more of a bird's eye view, go, what do we do? What happened? How do we feel about it? Oh, interesting. When I was doing these things weekly and I got this outcome and I felt this way, I got this outcome on a bigger level, and this was a byproduct. This is how I felt, right? So we start to link the weekly and the daily to the 6 weekly. We're getting that neural fusing. Does that make sense so far, Kayla? That neural fusing?
Yeah.
And then the major milestones, which might be 3 months or 6 months, there we're doing the same thing. Is we're looking at, we did this over a week, we did this over the course of 6 weeks, and then on a bigger scale, that 3 months or 6 months, we're activating different parts of the brain when we go, what happened over this period, and what was the outcome, and how do we feel about it? So it's exactly the same neural loop, but we strategically place these milestone steps with very precise conversation to be able to link what's happening daily. And coaches talk about this a lot, right? Like, what do I do daily? And think about the result that you're going to get 6 months down the road. Your brain doesn't have the capacity to do that. We as the buffer, we as the vessel between what a client does and the result that they're going to get and what they perceive will be the benefit, we are the buffer that create those links. So every single time we communicate with a client, and I mean every time we communicate with a client, our aim is to go, what is the neural link as a coach we want to support the client's brain in making right now? And that might be you practiced a certain habit, you got a certain outcome. How do you feel about it? Great. Let's keep doing that. Let's do that again. When we do this and we feel this and that happens, cool. And we do it again. If we do something or don't do something and it gives us a different result and we don't feel so good about it, it's our job also to make the neural link between different behaviors that might support and also behaviors that aren't necessarily supporting, while also maintaining that 80%. So every communication, you said it a few, maybe about 25 minutes ago, 27 centuries ago, because we're definitely past 40 minutes. And that was client retention and a client re-sign, or I would say client result, happen 1% at a time. And we hear this a lot in the industry and going, progress happens 1% at a time. I've heard in a number of business spaces that re-signs for clients to continue, the most important piece is the first 2 weeks and the last 2 weeks. And I say, well, is the most important time at Christmas and at Easter, or is it what you're doing every single day? You can't argue with that. It's every single day. That's what's going to accumulate to progress. And we look at that from a communication lens as well. Every communication we have with a client, there is a purpose and intent, and we have to be very conscious of what neural network we are fusing together. If we know how to track it, if we understand the systems, that is the single most powerful tool as a coach that you can bring in. It's called reinforcement. We get an uptick of dopamine, we get an uptick of oxytocin and serotonin, and all of the things that start to reshape the nervous system towards repeating that behavior over and over again, which means adopting the lifestyle. It means becoming a part of the client's identity. It means them learning skills over a long period of time, being more self-sufficient, and actually experiencing what they put their hand up, hoping that they'd receive from you.
100%. So we've taken them from pillar 1, client location, pillar 2, setting their targets, pillar 3, creating the process for them to go for, and then pillar 4, we've got those engagement targets to create that nice pathway to give the client an incredible experience as well as get them the results that they've paid us for.
Yep,
essentially.
100%.
Is there anything missing, Michelle, or anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, last piece, and I know we've spoken about this on other lives, but also in that last pillar, it's not just reinforcement, but it's picking up the cues of disengagement and picking up reflexes that might be pulling back, drop off risk, like we spoke about way at the beginning. Someone who's super, super excited and doing all of the stuff, it might seem like that client is absolutely ready and they're totally prepared for it. But through the lens of the nervous system, we go, oh, that's biggest risk. You can absolutely track and pick up what the biggest drop-off risk is from the very first conversation you have with a client. That is not profiling their system. It's taking a look at location, energetics, too much, too soon. And as a coach, right from the get-go, you start to pre-handle and pre-contain and balance out with these skills, that 80-20 rule, that internal-external balance. These milestones of reinforcing the behaviors that align with the goals and the outcomes that the client is wanting, while also deepening meaning, and then also picking up where their client might be a little bit off the mark. We pick it up very, very early. We want skills and tools to be able to pull back, to be able to regulate, and that's happening all along that process. So those drop-off cues, those reflexes that show up, check out our other lives if you haven't listened to them as of yet. That can show up at any point. It runs alongside these different pillars. But with these pillars, we pre-contain, pre-handle, and pre-regulate 90% of those reflexes that occur. It's great to work with reflexes, but if you can pre-handle and prevent 90% of them, and it is 90%, it's amazing, then you won't have to work so hard. Your client gets better result. Everybody wins.
You're proactive as opposed to reactive. And that in itself helps your nervous system in this whole process. Because as I've said before, and just speaking to coaches on calls, as well, it's like their nervous system is having an experience in the coaching experience as well. It's not just the clients. And that in itself is like, yeah, I've got 10 clients online right now, but that's taking up a lot of my capacity. And imagine if that could be tripled if you want to have 30 clients, 40 clients, 50 clients, and be able to handle all of them, know exactly where in their process they are, have a system that handles all of those little grass fires that come up, because they will, pre-handling those, then having the tools to be able to go and support them when they do show up. It's going to be a game changer for your entire business and life.
One of my favorite sayings, Kayla, do it now, do it well, especially if you don't think you need it.
Yeah.
Especially if you don't
100%.
think you need it. Pre-handle it before it's an issue and things become a lot easier. That's great modeling for your clients because you're teaching them through modeling. They get that experience, but as a business person, also absolutely essential. Do it before you need it and things are going to go smooth.
So those are the 4 pillars. Those are the 4 pillars inside the neuroscience of coaching. A quick rundown, almost 50 minutes worth of 12 weeks crammed into this. But those are also each, because I know there was a comment a little bit higher saying it seems like sometimes it sounds easy, but it can be a bit complex and it's difficult to keep up. Those 4 pillars are also broken down within the 12 weeks into steps. So there are steps within inside the pillars. If we think of skills and habits, we've got each of those broken down inside the neuroscience of coaching. So there's going to be that modeling piece within the container as well as the teaching component as well. So if you want to identify whether you are doing these well or whether maybe they need a little bit of work on these pillars, Michelle and I have created an assessment that you can do. There's 2 ways you can do it. You can do the quiz, which has been posted on my stories. It should be there for a little bit more, but I'll make sure I pop a link in my bio as well. And then also, if you go on to, if you're watching the replay of this, just comment assess and we'll send you the link via DM for that PDF assessment, the self-assessment, or you can just go and comment assess on any of our other posts and that will get sent to you via the DMs. So go and do that assessment. It only takes you 3 minutes. You'll identify which of the pillars might be missing or if there's a couple that might not be there. And then it's going to give you a breakdown of your results. So you're going to get a breakdown of your results and little bits and pieces that you can implement to start working towards these things. If you're listening to this and you're like, I need to know more about this, I need to learn more, there is a link in my bio as well. There's a landing page. You get all the information, everything you need to know about neuroscience of coaching. There's a link to book a call there to speak to either Michelle or myself about how this can work for your business and how this is going to work in your business. It's not for everyone, but we really want to make sure that everyone who enters the container goes through that process. We make sure that this is going to be the right fit for you, because again, modeling to get into a container, if it's not the right thing, then you're not going to get the results. So we go through that process. Next week is the last week to book. So next week is the last week to book in for a call for this semester of the neuroscience of coaching. If you've got any questions specifically for us, feel free to either DM us or book a call, and we'll be more than happy to chat with you about that. But I'm super excited. Anything else to add, Michelle? Anything I've missed?
First is just a credit to you, Kayla. I love a good quiz. I love quizzes so much, and you work so hard on that. So for anyone, even just curiosity's sake,
I just
go
had to do the technology.
do the quiz. Go do the quiz. It's
Please.
Amazing. When Kayla said that through to me the other day, I was away in New Zealand. She said it through to me today. It felt like Christmas Day to me. It was the nicest thing anyone had ever given me. I just loved it so much. So credit to your work, Kayla. Please go do the quiz. She worked so hard on that. And it's also really important information, right? To be able to self-assess as a coach, where are the pieces that I might be doing really well, and also the pieces where I'm really missing some big blocks. Just having that, this is external, right? Just having that external data to go, okay, I got it. We get way more clarity, and it helps gives give us direction and where we might need to focus or where we might need to ask for help. So if nothing else, forget neuroscience and coaching, just go do that darn quiz because you worked so hard on it. I love it so much. The other is I'm so excited for this cohort and this intake. We have amazing people that have signed up. They have been so interactive. I just love them so much. We've got some amazing heavy hitters in there. Some people who are working with just a small number of clients, some that have major businesses that have a very high volume of clients. It doesn't matter where you're at in that. Kayla and I are going to be taking you through, based on your location, what is the primary thing that you are going to need, how we set targets with you and reverse engineer that so you know exactly what to focus on as we move through. And then we focus in on the skills and habits that you're practicing and also work with your nervous system as you go through. Because as a student in that space, it is Kayla and my job to be able to support you and model for you so you can best serve your clients as well. So I am so excited for this cohort. I love the people in it already. For anyone that's on the fence, please reach out, have a chat with us. A yes or a no is totally okay too. We just want to make sure that if you're out there, if you're curious, if you need some help with something, we may be the space to be able to support and help. If not, we're very comfortable referring on to a different space that might be better, because it can feel kind of scary to hop on a call sometimes. But our number one goal is, if the thing you need support and help with is the thing that we can support and help with, then we get creative, we work out how that's going to look for you, and we take the next steps from there. So check out the quiz or just send us a DM and send us a message, and we're happy to book you in and have a good chat at the very least.
Yeah, I can't wait. Thanks so much, Michelle, for doing this live. And yeah, we'll see you all out there on the internet next time.